Sport Business. Global Sports Intelligence.
Hello, and welcome to Inside the Deal, the monthly podcast from Sport Business. My name is Frank Dunn. I'm the editor-at-large of Sport Business. And once a month, we take a look at a deal that we think says something interesting about where the industry is today and where it might be heading. Now, it won't always be the most valuable deal that we're reported on that month, and generally isn't, for the simple reason that anything that is in the kind of mega billions range, it gets reported on, everybody knows about it, and we don't have anything exclusive or specific to tell you about that. But we like to think that on this podcast, we give you some numbers, some data, some inside information that you're not going to get anywhere else. Now, today I'm joined by Ben Cronin, the global sponsorship editor of Sport Business, and we're going to talk about a deal in basketball between the Euroleague and the Abu Dhabi Department of Culture and Tourism. Among the many things that I'm going to find out today is what exactly is a flat top pyramid and how does that work in sponsorship. So welcome, Ben, and I'm sure that you don't want me to kick off today's episode by asking you about the outcome of the Liverpool United game last weekend. So what else is happening in your world?
It's okay, Frank. I've got broad shoulders, don't mind. Funnily enough, I was on the podcast a couple of weeks back for the United-Liverpool game, and I said it was harming United that they couldn't string 2 wins in a row together, and instantly knew that I'd jinxed it for Liverpool that weekend by saying that. So it just shows the dangers of sports punditry, and maybe I'll just confine myself to the business side of things from now on.
Well, before we get into the business, there's something important that we need to say. We want to say a big hello to our former colleague, Matty Cutler. You may know Matt from his time at Sport Business or Two Circles or the Expected Goals podcast or any one of the multifarious activities across media, sport and comedy that he turns his hand to. You probably know that Matt is facing a fairly serious health challenge. So big hello to Matt. Everybody here is thinking about you. It's Sport Business. Everybody's rooting for you. I'm sure that you were cheered up by your beloved Aston Villa giving Man City a thumping at the weekend. So play up the Villa and give our lad some reasons to be cheerful. And we'll see you on the front line soon, Matt.
I second that, Frank. Matt's one of the good guys, and we're really upset here at Sport Business to hear that he's having a rough time. And we're wishing him a lot of strength and positivity and just hoping he can get on top of this thing.
Okay, so down to business, Ben. Now, I'm keen to talk about flat top pyramids, but before we do, I guess we need to get up to speed on the basic nuts and bolts of this deal between the Euroleague and Abu Dhabi Department of Culture and Tourism.
Yes, so the deal is between 2 brands, Etihad Airways and Experience Abu Dhabi. They've agreed to sponsor Euroleague and the second tier Europe Cup for 4 years. They're going to be designated as main partners of the competitions, and they've also secured presenting partner rights to the Euroleague Final Four, which is the season-ending showpiece event for Euroleague basketball to determine the overall Euroleague winner. Although there's 2 brands involved, we understand there's only one overarching contract, which was agreed with the Department of Culture and Tourism Abu Dhabi, which is a government body which is working in conjunction with the airline. From speaking to several sources, my understanding is the deal is between 9.5 million and 10.5 million euros per season. I think it starts at the lower end of the scale and then escalators take it up towards the upper end, towards the end of the contract. As you'd expect, as part of that, they're going to get perimeter LED advertising at Euroleague matches as well as Europe Cup matches. And there's also some shirt branding rights involved in it as well. So the way that will work in practice is Experience Abu Dhabi will appear under the Euroleague badge on team shirts for the regular season. And then I think Etihad is going to appear in that sort of shirt position for the Final Four. So yeah, it's a good deal for Euroleague. I mean, we can also talk a little bit about how much that differs from the existing model that they had in place before.
Yeah, well, that's what I wanted to ask you. Obviously, on this podcast, we tried to identify deals which we think have something interesting about them over and above just the financials. What was it about this deal that made it stand out?
For me, it's interesting just because it represents this strategic pivot for Euroleague basketball. As everyone knows, they had the deal with Turkish Airlines. They had a title sponsorship model before. Turkish Airlines was the title sponsor for 15 odd years, and as such, it was referred to as the Turkish Airlines Euroleague. As you say, they've moved towards this flat pyramid sponsorship model, and this is the first deal that they've really done that embodies how that's going to work in practice. Instead of a pyramid where you've got sort of Turkish Airlines at the pointy end, now they're going to have two presenting partners. So there's the one deal here that's already been done with Etihad and Experience Abu Dhabi for the Final Four, and then they're going to have another presenting sponsor for the postseason Euroleague playoffs. And then below this, I think the way it's going to work in practice is they'll have a bunch of global sponsors. They'll have a betting tier. Euroleague lends itself, because of the reasons involved, to having quite a few betting sponsors, I would have thought. And then they'll have a supplier tier underneath that. And I've been told that they've already found the second presenting sponsor. There's a deal already in place. So things are beginning to take shape. I don't know why that hasn't been announced yet. It might just be sort of refining the contract, or they're just waiting for an opportune moment to announce that. But the beauty of not having a title sponsor is it makes it more brand clean for Euroleague, so they can develop the Euroleague brand without having another brand involved in that. You hear a lot of other potential sponsors don't necessarily like sponsoring an event where they're going to have to refer to another sponsor in their communications. Sponsoring the Turkish Airlines Euroleague doesn't have the same ring to it as Visa has struck a deal to sponsor Euroleague. They've taken away, a sort of impediment to other brands doing sponsorship deals with them.
And I mean, from what I understand, there is still a basic pyramid structure for the portfolio. So you have different tiers from the lowest tier to the top tier. But it sounds as though it's really only the apex of the pyramid where there's been this slight modification. So if that's the case, if it's really only that top part of the pyramid, what impact has that had in terms of value? I mean, is this, you said it's a pivot by Euroleague. Is it one that is bearing fruit?
I think so. Yeah, I think our deals tracker database, which has a number of sponsorship values, for properties like Euroleague, had the previous Turkish Airlines deal pegged at about 7.5 to 8 million euros per annum. By all accounts, that was a very favourable deal for Turkish Airlines. Owen Davis, the chief commercial officer at Euroleague, said the deal was delivering UEFA Champions League value, but not for UEFA Champions League money. So effectively, with this one deal, 9.5 to 10.5 million euros per annum, they've already exceeded what they were earning from Turkish Airlines. I think there was a bit of VIK involved in that previous deal as well, probably connected to flying people around. So they've exceeded that, and they've got more power to add from this second presenting partner deal. So it puts them in a strong position. I heard that they assess the sort of the fair market value of what they felt the title rights could go for, and there was an opportunity for Turkish Airlines to come back and meet what they priced the asset at. But I was told by Gowan Davis that there was just a bit too much of a gap between what Euroleague wanted and what Turkish was prepared to pay in the end. If you look at this, I think they've probably got the best of both worlds. They're getting more money, they've got a more brand clean event, and as I said, they've got more power to add from a second presenting sponsor as and when that one gets announced.
Now, we know, I think everybody in the industry knows that IMG has always had a very close relationship with the EuroLeague across various different activities. I suspect they were in the mix here as well in somehow.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so they've got a long-standing relationship with IMG, and we reported in January that they agreed a 10-year extension to that. Part of that is sponsorship sales support, as well as media rights distribution and other services. Industry sources, so people I spoke to said that, as I mentioned previously, IMG evaluated the sort of the fair market value of those rights last year to determine whether or not the prevailing sponsorship model was still the best interest of EuroLeague. And they were ultimately involved in brokering the deal with the Department of Culture and Tourism for Abu Dhabi.
There was a long negotiation then with the incumbent, with Turkish Airlines, but in the end, so it wasn't a question of Turkish Airlines walking away from this property. It was basically they wouldn't meet the valuation that IMG and the EuroLeague had come up with for the new cycle.
Yeah, that's my understanding. It must be quite bracing for Turkish Airlines because, in the previous cycle, they were UEFA Champions League sponsor. They lost out to that to Qatar Airways. They've actually gone on to strike a 2-cycle deal with the UEFA Champions League, so that's no longer something they can get in the near future. And now they've lost the relationship with EuroLeague. So, yeah, it's been a sort of a chastening period for them. Yeah, by all accounts, I don't think it was that they just decided to offload it. Certainly that's not the impression that I got from conversations with people. I just think they just weren't able to meet in the middle.
As a consequence of this new deal, from what you're saying, there's been quite a healthy uplift in the value of what is now the top tier category level. Where does this leave the EuroLeague overall as a sponsorship property? This deal, obviously, this category is heading north in value terms. What is the overall picture in terms of the value of the portfolio? Is it something that's growing? Is it something that depends upon the tier you're in? Where does it stand generally, the EuroLeague?
So from speaking to people at Euroleague, Gawain Davis, Chief Commercial Officer, was telling me that they're deliberately taking a less is more approach. They had a lot of regional or local market sponsors previously. They're kind of moving away from that. They had some local deals in big categories. He mentioned quick service restaurants and food and beverage, where you just have a local deal. And what that does is that blocks them off from doing a bigger global deal at that level so they were getting relatively low investment and blocking off what might be a more lucrative category. So now they've said that they've got 50% fewer sponsors, but they're getting 50% more revenue. I haven't seen their overall sponsorship numbers, but if we are able to get hold of those, we'll certainly report on them. But you can see that they've managed to attract some blue chip brands. I mean, Etihad Airways and Abu Dhabi Tourism, certainly big brands. They've also done a deal with Visa, which speaks to their regional footprint. My understanding was that Visa did that deal with them because they wanted to reach consumers in Spain and some of those sort of markets that EuroLeague is really good at activating in. It's always a great sign when you do it with a blue chip brand like Visa. So I think the overall impression is that they're moving in a strong direction. And as I say, once they've got these two presenting partner deals in place, then I think they'll be on a good footing.
And this idea of moving away from a single title sponsor for the whole championship to this idea of presenting partners or more partners on that top tier, is this something which reflects wider thinking in the industry? Is it a trend that's happening now? And is it something that is driven, these kind of changes, do they reflect the needs of the brand more than the needs of the sport, or is it somewhere in between? How does that all pan out?
Is driven by the needs of the seller, and EuroLeague in this case. And the art of this is that they've succeeded in creating something. They've taken away rights, but they've still succeeded in creating something that's compelling enough for brands to come in and find it appealing and attractive. And there are some successful precedents for this, and then there are some less successful precedents. I'm thinking of the Premier League. For a long time, it was referred to as the Barclays Premier League, and then they did away with title sponsor. Barclays slipped back into the portfolio, continues to sponsor the Premier League, but they adopted more of a flat sponsorship model, having a number, I can't remember, there's a limit for the Premier League. I think it's a limit of 7 sponsors. 7 or 8, I can't remember off the top of my head, but they adopted this flat sponsorship model, all the brands at the same tier, and they ended up exceeding what they were earning when they had Barclays in place as a title sponsor by having a number of different brands in there. And you're also not putting all of your eggs in one basket in that situation. You've got a diversified portfolio. So if your title sponsor drops out, you're not immediately in trouble. There was a less successful model, which was the EPCR, and I was told that IMG and EuroLeague were very conscious of that precedent when they decided to go down this route. They effectively moved away from a title deal with Heineken. They said they were going to embrace a UEFA Champions League type sponsorship hierarchy. The brands didn't align with it, and it took them a long time to get back on a sound footing, and they've actually gone back towards a title model now. So first of all, they went back to Heineken and they became the title sponsor again. And then more recently, they've done a deal with Investec, which is probably the first time that they've actually got back on a sound footing since they made that misstep a few years ago. So interestingly, EuroLeague, they don't think they're ready for a UEFA Champions League style sponsorship model. They still think this flat pyramid is better for them. I think they have to give up more. They have to give up these presenting partner rights. They've found that is more successful in delivering revenues for them than UEFA Champions League model might be.
And one thing that interests me looking at this deal is that the structure and the model has changed, but this industry sector has remained the same. It's one tourism brand replacing, well, 2 tourism brands replacing one tourism brand. It's still the same industry sector. So I wonder, what is it about the EuroLeague as a sports entity which makes it attractive to those big, and they are either state-owned or partly state-owned. There's a lot of serious money behind these bodies. What is it that makes the EuroLeague attractive to that kind of category?
Well, it's very easy when I'm sort of sitting here in my sort of sports media bubble to not really understand the popularity of EuroLeague, and in places, as I said, like Turkey, Greece, Spain, and just how passionate those fans are and their propensity to travel to these big events like the EuroLeague Final Four. Abu Dhabi hosted this year's event, so a lot of those passionate fans travel to Abu Dhabi. And the regional footprint of Euroleague lends itself very well to an airline like Etihad, and in terms of just the places they fly to. I heard that as a consequence of Abu Dhabi hosting the Final Four, stakeholders in the region were very impressed with just the number of fans. It wasn't like, if you remember when the World Athletics Championships were hosted in the Middle East and there were empty stadiums and it was a disaster for the television product. That's never going to be a problem with these passionate fans. They're going to travel from places like Turkey and Spain and Greece to get to the Final Four. I should actually say, the sponsorship contract is separate to the hosting contract. So Abu Dhabi has got what's called a 1+2 agreement. So they were guaranteed to host the event for at least one edition, and then they've got an option to extend for 2 additional Final Fours. But that is yet to be determined. But you would think, with the sponsorship deal in place, they're pretty convinced about this being a good tool to encourage visitors to the region. So they probably want people to fly on Etihad and then bookend the Final Four with a couple of weeks staying at one of their tourism resorts, which is, plays into this whole piece about diversification of the economy and moving away from other industries and getting people to travel to the region.
Yeah, I think I read in one of the sport business news stories that hosting contract alone was worth something like $20 million. So, I mean, clearly there's large amounts of money being invested across the board in sponsorship, in hosting. You started last year this idea of doing sector overviews for sponsorship. And one of the first ones that we looked at was tourism in July. And I just wanted to read a couple of stats from that because it's a very interesting sector generally, I think, for sports sponsorship investment. We looked at travel and tourism across the board, and there are some figures from the UN World Tourist Organization, which is also known as UN Tourism, that in 2024, travel and tourism contributed almost $11 trillion to the global GDP. That was an increase of 8.5% on the previous year, which was taking the value of that entire sector back to pre-COVID or above pre-COVID levels. And that number takes into account the entire economic impact. So it includes things like employment and everything around it. In terms of actual revenues driven by tourism, the same body, UN Tourism, reported that in 2024, it generated $1.5 trillion, which again reflected a complete recovery post-COVID. Growth, the UN Tourism suggested in the sector, would be about 5% this year and 5% next year. And these figures, I should point out, include airlines as well, like Etihad. But one of the things that was interesting when we did that research is that we noticed that there was a kind of a regional boom within a sector boom. And not surprisingly, that regional boom was the Middle East. And I think the more I look at this deal, the more I think that that really is the context, or certainly one of the most important contexts for this new Euroleague deal. I think we can say that basically the entry of Dubai is a relevant context for this deal, that they've been given a wildcard place in the league for 5 seasons, which more or less coincides with the duration of this new deal. It makes me wonder, looking at the whole strategy of the Euroleague, and this might be unfair, but I'm wondering whether or not that in terms of commercial revenue, the Euroleague may be maxed out in certain of its core territories and is therefore looking to expand into areas like the Middle East and maybe further afield, maybe more into Eastern Europe, because that's where they're going to find additional commercial growth.
It certainly helps to get a sponsorship deal like this over the line. They're very strong in certain territories, as I said, Turkey, Spain, Greece. They're doing well there. Easy to underestimate just how followed it is in those regions and how important it is to brands and fans in those regions. It certainly helps if you can expand your footprint, increase sort of local fanship and the sort of local sports economy, which is important to these Middle Eastern countries, which are looking to, as I said earlier, diversify their economies. So you can certainly see the rationale for that. I think they'd probably like to get a team in the UK at some stage, given how developed our sports economy is. Whether there is the same sort of passion for basketball in the UK as there is in these other regions is probably less certain, but it would probably help them. And that would certainly facilitate some deals with sort of more Western European brands if they could do that.
Just one last question, Ben. I don't think we can talk about basketball in Europe without dealing with the elephant in the room and the fact that the NBA and FIBA are talking about launching a franchise-based league in Europe in 1 or maybe 2 seasons' time. That must cast a shadow, I would have thought, over the Euroleague and over domestic basketball leagues too. Now, this is way too big a rabbit hole for us to disappear down on today's episode. We don't really have time. But it looks to me as though the Euroleague approach is, for the moment, is business as usual. They're just getting on with it.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be rumblings, and we're going to rehearse some of those old arguments that we had with the European Super League about the European sports model and who represents the embodiment of that, whether or not Euroleague basketball, the sort of guardian of the European sports model, whether or not a US body like the NBA and, coming from the US with a sort of typically closed sports model would be deemed anti-competitive in that setting. I think we're going to hear all of those arguments again, but it's definitely a threat for Euroleague, and they'll be very eager to tie down their teams to long-term contracts, make sure that the bigger names are not going to turn heel and align themselves with the NBA, because that, a European version of the NBA would obviously be very appealing to a lot of people. But as I said, Euroleague's doing great things at the moment from a sponsorship perspective, at least, and maybe that'll compel some of the teams. Maybe they even needed to create a commercial revamp and shake things up a little bit to show that they're still the best guardians for the game for these teams and the best people to sort of drive commercial value from the rights.
Well, thanks for that. Thanks for those insights, Ben. I think that's a good place to round things up. Now, if you want more insight into the key deals in sports sponsorship, or if you want to get access to the monster sport business sponsorship database of deal information, you can either have a look on our website or you can write to info@sportbusiness.com. So thank you for listening. Enjoy the rest of your day. And I have to say, good luck to Aston Villa in their game on Saturday night.